My father sold the house I inherited and said the money would be used to pay for my brother's vacation. I laughed. A week later, when my lawyer called him, the laughter disappeared. Honestly, I thought my father was joking when he said that money would go toward my brother's vacation after selling the house I inherited. I even laughed. But a week later, when my lawyer called him, there was no room for laughter anymore. That house meant everything to me. It wasn't just a property left in my grandmother's will. It was where I spent most of my childhood, where I felt safe when things got tough with my parents. My grandmother was the only one in the family who truly cared about me. She practically raised me while my parents were too busy with their own lives and too focused on my younger brother, Adam. She was always there for me. She made me feel like I mattered. And when she passed away, she left the house to me. It wasn't a surprise. My parents rarely visited her. They never lifted a finger to help when she was sick. Adam, the golden child, didn't care either. He was too busy doing nothing. At 24 years old, he still lived at home, unemployed, yet somehow, he was full of potential in my father's eyes. I had long accepted that I was the forgotten child, the one who had to fend for himself. But I never thought it would come to this. One afternoon, I decided to stop by the house just to see it. I hadn't moved in. I already had my own place. But I liked knowing it was still there, waiting for me. But when I arrived, I felt something was off. There were cars in the driveway. Not mine, not my grandmother's, but someone else's. I walked up to the door and rang the bell. A few seconds later, a man in his 30s opened it, a woman standing behind him. They looked confused. "Can I help you?" the man asked. I frowned. "Yeah, this is my house. Who are you?" The woman let out a nervous laugh. "We bought this house last month from the owner." I felt like I had been punched in the stomach. "What?" The man crossed his arms. "We bought it legally. What's the problem?" My mouth went dry. I looked at them, at the cars, at the porch that was no longer mine, and I could barely process it. I pulled out my phone, checked my emails, my messages. Nothing. No notifications. No sale notice. But I already knew what had happened. I didn't say another word. I just turned around, got into my car, and drove straight to my parents' house. Adam was the only one home, sprawled out on the couch, glued to his phone. He barely looked up when I walked in. "What?" he mumbled. I took a deep breath and tried to stay calm. "Where are Mom and Dad?" He shrugged. I clenched my fists. "Why did they sell my house?" Adam blinked. "Oh yeah?" He nodded as if it was just a casual comment. "They'll be back soon." Then he went back to looking at his phone. I stood there for a full minute just staring at him. He simply didn't care. So I waited. When my parents finally walked in, I didn't even let them sit down. "What the hell did you do?" My father sighed, as if I were the problem. "Look, Hubert, it wasn't fair for you to keep the house. Your mother and I had other plans." "Plans?" I repeated. "So you forged documents and sold my house?" My father continued, completely indifferent. Adam needed a vacation. This time I almost laughed again. But it wasn't funny. I shook my head. "I'm not letting this slide." I turned and walked out because my father had no idea what was coming. I barely remember how I got home. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles were white. I could still hear my father's voice in my head, calm and condescending, as if he hadn't stolen from me, as if it was no big deal. Adam needed a vacation. He needed a car. Meanwhile, my grandmother's house, the only real home I ever had, was gone. I parked in front of my apartment and just sat there for a while. I wasn't going to let this slide, but I also wasn't going to act without a plan. My father was arrogant, but he wasn't stupid. If he did this, he must have covered his tracks. So I called my friend Daniel. Daniel was a lawyer, and not just a good one. He was ruthless. If there was any sign of fraud in the sale, he would find it. I told him everything over the phone, and by the time I finished, he was furious. "Meet me in my office tomorrow," he said. "Bring everything, emails, documents, messages. I don't care if it's a birthday card from your grandmother. If it mentions the house, I want it." I didn't sleep much that night. My mind kept replaying everything. My grandmother's voice, my father's smug smile, Adam's indifference, and underneath it all, one single thought. They think they won. They had no idea what was coming. The next morning, I met Daniel at his office. I handed over every document I had. My grandmother's will, bank statements, even old messages where she talked about how much she wanted me to have the house. He reviewed everything for a while, then leaned back in his chair. "Your father is an idiot," he finally said. I raised an eyebrow. Why? Because he didn't just commit fraud, he left a paper trail. Daniel turned the monitor toward me, showing something I hadn't expected. A forged signature. My signature. I leaned in. "Wait, that's not mine," Daniel muttered. "Your father forged your consent for the sale. And he did it with a notary who has already been investigated for shady deals. This is bad for him. Very bad." I let out a long breath. "So, what's the plan?" Daniel cracked his knuckles. "First, we send a formal notice. We give him a chance to return the money before we take this to court. But from what you told me about your father, I doubt he'll cooperate." "Not in a million years," I muttered. "Then we sue. And if he can't pay, he'll have to give up his assets. The house, his savings, everything." I nodded, feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. Satisfaction. "Let's do this." I knew my father wouldn't return the money. He was too arrogant to admit he had done anything wrong. To him, I had always been a problem, an obstacle between him and his ideal version of a family, where Adam was the perfect son and I was just an inconvenient detail. But now, he had made a mistake too big to ignore, and I was going to make sure he paid for it. That same day, Daniel prepared the formal notice. He sent it via email, by mail, and even had a court officer deliver it in person. I almost wished I could have been there to see my father's face when he received that document. But I already knew his reaction. Contempt, maybe even laughter. He thought he could treat me like nothing without consequences. He thought he would get away with it. 2 days later, I got a call. It was my mother. "Hubert, why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice exasperated. I pressed the phone against my ear. "Do you really need me to explain?" "It's just a house," she insisted. "Your father and I made this decision because we thought it was the right thing to do. You already have your own apartment, Hubert. You didn't need that house." I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to control my anger. "I didn't need it? You're talking about the house where I grew up. The house my grandmother left me because she knew you never cared about me. And you sold it to pay for Adam's vacation. Do you really think that's normal? It's not that simple. It's exactly that simple." I cut her off. "You forged my signature. That's a crime." My mother was silent for a moment, and I knew she understood I was right. But in the end, she just sighed and muttered, "You've always been so dramatic." I hung up. There was nothing left to discuss. The deadline for a response to the notice passed without any attempt to settle. No surprise. My father truly believed I wouldn't have the guts to go through with this. So, Daniel filed the lawsuit. The reaction didn't take long. The next day, Adam sent me a message. "Adam, seriously? You're suing your own family over an old house? How pathetic." I laughed without humor. Adam, who had never had to fight for anything in his life, thought I was overreacting. He had no idea what it was like to have something that truly mattered stolen from you. I didn't reply. He didn't deserve an answer. But my father didn't stay silent. By the end of that week, Daniel received an email from his lawyer. A mediocre one, probably a family friend who had taken a case to try and intimidate us. The email read something like, "My client denies all accusations. The property was sold legally, and any attempt to contest the sale will be considered harassment and defamation." I showed the email to Daniel. He read it, rolled his eyes, and let out a laugh. He's bluffing. If he were so confident, he would have already presented documents proving the sale was legitimate. But he can't, because the signature is fake. So we move forward with the lawsuit? Without a doubt. The following days were hell. My parents started telling the family that I was trying to destroy their lives. I received messages from uncles, cousins, even some acquaintances telling me I was taking things too far. "It's just a house. He's your father. Family is more important than money." But no one asked why he did this to me. No one asked how I was dealing with it. To them, I was the villain. And then the bomb dropped. Daniel obtained a crucial document, the sale contract for the house with my forged signature. He requested a forensic analysis, and the result was obvious. The signature wasn't mine. My father hadn't just committed fraud. He had been incredibly sloppy about it. That was enough to make the case even more serious. Beyond the civil lawsuit, we now had evidence to open a criminal case against him. On the day of the first hearing, I saw my father in court for the first time since this all started. He sat next to his lawyer, looking bored, as if this was a waste of his time. My mother didn't show up. Neither did Adam. The judge began the session. My father's lawyer tried to argue that there was no concrete evidence of fraud. Daniel, without saying a word, simply handed over the documents analyzed by the expert. The judge glanced at them for a few seconds, then turned to my father. "Sir, can you explain why your son's signature appears to have been forged?" My father's face turned red. He started mumbling something about administrative errors and misunderstandings, but the judge wasn't buying it. The hearing ended with the court ordering a full review of all financial documents related to the sale. That meant that if my father was hiding something, and I knew he was, it wouldn't be long before they uncovered it. As we left the courthouse, he finally broke the silence and approached me. "Do you think you've won anything?" he growled. "This won't end well for you, Hubert." I crossed my arms. "No, Dad. The one who always thought he could get away with everything is you. But that's over." He stared at me for a long moment, then walked away. That night, I sat in my apartment and let it all sink in. There was still a long road ahead, but for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was in control. 2 weeks later, we received the official notice. The court recognized the fraud and annulled the sale of the house. The property would be returned to me, and my father was ordered to pay me compensation. The best part? He didn't have the money. That meant he would have to sell his own house to pay what he owed. When that news reached him, I got one last message. "Father, you destroyed your own family. I hope you're happy." I stared at the screen for a moment. Then I smiled. I had never been happier. My father always believed he was untouchable. He had spent his entire life convinced that he could do whatever he wanted, that he would never have to face the consequences of his actions. But now he was cornered. I had already managed to get my house back, but fate had one more surprise for him. I heard the news a few days after winning the lawsuit. Daniel called me, and there was an amused tone in his voice, something rare for him. "You won't believe this," he said. "Tell me my father got arrested," I joked, sprawled out on my apartment couch. Daniel let out a short laugh. "Not yet, but the buyers of your house just filed a lawsuit against him." I froze for a moment. "What?" "They're demanding compensation. They claim they were deceived, that your father sold them a property without the proper documentation, and now they've lost the house they legally bought." I let out a low chuckle. It wasn't a laugh of humor. It was pure relief. Finally, something fair in this world. Daniel continued. "They have a solid case. Your father is going to have to pay them a significant amount. And does he have that kind of money?" No. That single word was enough to make me smile. Genuinely smile. For the first time since this all started. When I returned to my house, to start organizing everything, I ran into the former buyers. The couple who had moved in was there, gathering their belongings. For a moment, I felt a pang of guilt. I knew they weren't at fault for my father's fraud. They had simply bought the house without knowing the truth. But I also wasn't responsible for what happened. The woman was the first to approach me. "You're the real owner, right?" I nodded. She sighed, looking tired but not angry. "Look, we just want you to know that we have nothing against you. We know you were just as deceived as we were." Her husband stepped closer, crossing his arms. "Your father, on the other hand, I hope he rots in misery." I let out a short laugh. "I can agree with that." They explained that they were suing my father for financial and emotional damages. They had spent a lot of money on the purchase, the move, and the renovations they had started. All for nothing. Now, they were left without a home and without the money they had invested. "This isn't your fault," the man said, "but someone has to pay." I nodded slowly. "And he deserves every cent he has to pay." They grabbed the last of their boxes, said their goodbyes, and left. Even though we had never truly met before, I knew there was mutual respect between us. They didn't see me as the enemy, and I fully understood why they were suing my father. Now, with my house back, I could finally breathe. It felt strange being there after everything that had happened. I walked through the rooms, feeling the weight of every memory. The scent was still the same. The sound of the wind passing through the bedroom window was still familiar. It was as if the house had been waiting for me all along. I didn't regret anything. My entire family saw me as a traitor now. My mother hadn't called me since the last time we spoke. Adam, as expected, posted ridiculous indirect messages on social media, talking about how jealousy destroys families and how money can't buy love. I laughed when I saw that. The same guy who had lived his entire life off my parents, who had spent the money from the house that belonged to me on vacations, was now trying to act like the moral authority. But I didn't care. For years, I had been treated like I was disposable, like my presence was tolerated, but never truly wanted. My grandmother was the only one who ever made me feel important, and her house was her last gift to me. My father tried to steal that from me. He tried to erase the only thing I had that truly mattered. And he failed. Now, he was about to lose everything. His house would likely be sold to cover his debts. Adam would have nowhere to stay. My mother, who had always taken my father's side, would now have to choose between supporting him or letting him sink on his own. And me? I was fine. For the first time, I felt at peace. I didn't regret anything. If I could go back in time, I'd do it all over again. If I had to face my family in court once more, I wouldn't hesitate, because I finally learned a lesson I should have understood a long time ago. Family means nothing when those people don't treat you like family. And I owed nothing to anyone. The news that my father would have to pay not only me, but also the buyers was the final blow. He tried to appeal, tried to claim that everything had been a misunderstanding, even attempted to play the victim in front of the judge. But the truth was laid bare for everyone to see. He hadn't just committed fraud, he had deceived two parties at the same time. And in the end, justice was served. The final ruling determined that he had to pay significant compensation, both to me and to the former buyers. The amount was far too high for him to cover with what he had, and as we expected, he was forced to sell his own house. It was a humiliating process. He tried to avoid it in every way possible, even considered putting the house in someone else's name to hide his assets. But Daniel was one step ahead and made sure that didn't happen. Eventually, with no other choice, he put the house on the market, and ironically, the very house where he and my mother had lived ended up being bought by strangers. My mother panicked. For the first time, she seemed to grasp the consequences of everything they had done. She tried calling me a few times, but I never answered. There was nothing left to say. When they finally moved out, my father was left with a small apartment in a much simpler neighborhood than the luxury he was used to. My mother went with him because, in the end, she had always been his accomplice. Adam, on the other hand, went into complete denial. He had never worked, never had to deal with any responsibilities, and suddenly, he found himself without a home and without the allowance he had always received. On the day everything was settled, he had the audacity to come looking for me. "You're a bastard," he spat, furious. "You destroyed our family over an old house." I laughed, but not out of joy. It was a bitter laugh, the kind that comes when you finally realize just how delusional someone is. I destroyed our family? I crossed my arms. Wasn't it our father who sold a house that wasn't his? Wasn't it him who forged my signature? He scoffed. He just wanted to help. He wanted to help you. Like always. He looked at me as if I were a stranger. "You've always been jealous. You always hated that I had everything handed to me while you had to work for it. That was the last straw. I worked for it because I had no other choice. Because while you were being spoiled and protected, I had to survive. Grandma was the only person who ever truly cared about me, and you all tried to steal the one thing she left me." He rolled his eyes. "Oh, come on, don't be so dramatic." I stepped closer to him, my voice firm. "Listen carefully, Adam, because this is the last time we're ever going to talk. You're a parasite. You've spent your entire life leeching off our parents without ever lifting a finger to become someone. But now they have nothing left to give you. And me? I don't owe you a damn thing." He fell silent. For the first time, he had nothing to say. "You want to know how this ends?" I continued. "Dad is going to spend the rest of his life bitter and broke. Mom will keep pretending none of this is her fault, and you're going to have to figure out how to survive on your own. Good luck with that." Then I simply turned around and walked away. I never looked back. In the months that followed, I heard bits and pieces of what happened. My father tried to re-enter the job market. but he couldn't find anything that paid enough to maintain the lifestyle he was used to. My mother, not knowing what else to do, started doing odd jobs. Their house was gone. Their luxury belongings were sold. And for the first time in their lives, they knew what it felt like to lose everything. Adam tried asking other relatives for help, but no one wanted to support him. He ended up having to share an apartment with two acquaintances and finally started looking for a job. I heard he spent a while complaining that I had ruined his life. But once reality hit, he finally realized he had to grow up. And me? I moved on. I stayed in my house and rebuilt my life with no guilt, no regrets. I cut ties with my family, and for the first time, I felt free. Because in the end, I learned something valuable. Family isn't about who shares your blood. Family is about who respects you. And those three, they were never really my family. I didn't look back, and I never needed to.